Cowboys, who doesn't love them? Those good old boys on the frontier, saving the local townfolk from the violent Indians, hunting down the outlaws and banditos, and making the world a better place to live in. They're the knight of American society, those with chivalry and the likes of a real gentleman. That's what all the Clint Eastwood movies taught us. That is the romanticized Old West. So going into Red Dead Redemption, that's what we should expect, right? A good old boy on the frontier trying to clean off the uncivilized mess of it all? Well, no. Red Dead Redemption isn't about a good old boy. It isn't about a nameless stranger walking into an empty town to duel the baddest man on this side of the Mississippi. When it comes down to it, Red Dead Redemption is about a very flawed man doing his best to escape from his past, an outlaw in his previous life, and still an amazingly dangerous man with a gun. While Red Dead Redemption does take inspiration from the old westerns of Hollywood's day past, Red Dead does not take glory in it. It's a full-blown Greek tragedy that does its best to show a de-romanticized version of one of the most idealized times in American history, right next to when Jefferson, Washington, and Hamilton had an epic rap battle of history. Red Dead Redemption is a grittier take on the West, one not of heroism, but cynicism, followed by the hypocrisy of those who promise the most amount of freedom. It's about fighting our very own nature, an unwinnable war on change and ourselves, the nature of redemption, revenge, and how they affect a never-ending cycle of violence and decay. Red Dead Redemption tells us there is no glory in this West. There is no righteous hero with no name who gets the gold. There is bleakness, death, violence, and genocide. Red Dead Redemption does its best to show us there is no glory to be found in the Old West. When the game first begins, we're shown a steamboat, the waters eerily calm below it, a piano playing softly in the background. This is where we first see John Marston, walking off the boat, surrounded by two federal officers. It isn't long before this calming music shifts into a tense western theme as John walks the streets of Blackwater. As soon as we watch John get on the train to head further west, the calming music returns. The music plays in juxtaposition. The music here is very interesting, and I think it does its part well to show us the conflicting ideals of America and the Old West. The steamboat is something we associate with the idealization of manifest destiny and the idea of the Great American West. I mean, have you rode the Mark Twain at Disneyland? It's a front towards the romanticization of the old frontier. However, it's not long after we see John before the tense theme plays, the brutal part of America, the outlaw killers that contradicted the nice perfect Americana image. The first train scene sets up the themes of the first act amazingly well, with the two conversations we hear in front of John and behind him. Both the old women and the missionary seem to speak in riddles, saying one thing, but then something on the complete opposite spectrum not a second later. Yet, both talk in ways relating to our protagonist. The old women talk about a frontier being tamed, the ways of the West dying out for civilization. The natives may have lost everything, but they gained God, so we can place ourselves away from any blame for the awfulness of what has happened to their own civilization. Interestingly, this is similar to how John describes his outlaw days, saying he was righteous, placing blame away from any bad he did. The missionary and Jenny talk of redemption, about what is different between a savage and a civilized person. Funny here, they're talking about the natives of the West, who are seen as godless, but a lot of what they're saying can be attributed to John Marston and the outlaws of the West. John robbed and killed for a living. Can someone like him ever be a decent person in the eyes of this new civilized land? The train finally stops in the town of Armadillo, and John steps off. Here, finally, we get to play the game, and oh man is it wacky. I do think it holds up very well for being made in 2010 though, but it definitely suffers from Rockstar syndrome. Iconic Rockstar wonky shooting and iconic Rockstar wonky walking. But overall, it worked pretty decently for being made in 2010 and playing it modern. And before I go any further, I recommend dusting off your Xbox 360 or PS3 and giving it a play. Or downloading this funny thing called Xenia. Make sure you download the Canary version. It is better, but you didn't hear that from me. Anywho, John walks into a good old Western saloon and meets Jake, his tour guide to Fort Mercer. As we ride up to Fort Mercer, we learn John really isn't the fastest bullet in the chamber. Walking up and calling for an infamous outlaw isn't really the smartest.
Bill! Bill, come for you!
This is where we first meet Bill Williamson. His character isn't really developed, but he is central to John's story. Overall, I really just want to know what John's plan was here. I mean, further down the line, we learn he needs to bring Bill in to see his family again, so we need to capture him and turn him into jail. But calling out for him overall, and having 3 guns trained on him while trying to negotiate was never going to go well. So, to be expected, John is shot, and our brief intro to this Western world comes to an end. Before I get into the meat of Act 1, I first overall want to give my general overbrief of it. I believe Act 1 of this game suffers from what I like to call Rockstar satire disease. What I mean by this is just about everyone you come to meet within the first act is an absolute crazy nutjob that is a satire of one thing or another, with that satire being basically their entire character overall. I'm sure satire being their only central character trait will never get obnoxious. Wait a minute. Now, I don't think this is a fatal flaw if it is done with nuance, as the satire we see deeper in the story is absolutely incredible. However, these early characters almost have nothing to them besides the satire, and they don't really have a story to really keep them, interesting. To follow with this, the plot in Act 1 never develops until the very last mission before Mexico. It is definitely the low point of the game that can be a little rough to get through, as you do pointless mission after pointless mission to try and get people to get ready for an assault on Fort Mercer. Now, luckily for Red Dead, unlike some Rockstar games, not all of it is satire, and there's an actual in-depth story with some profound meaning. However, we do need to dive deep into the satire stagnant part of the game before we get to the actual golden stake. So going forward with this analysis in Act 1, I'm going to talk more about the characters' meanings, going into depth about scenes that I think hold the most importance. The best way to describe what I'm going to get into is John Marston's wacky emporium of strange characters. John soon wakes up in a little shed on the McFarlane ranch. We learn that it was Bonnie McFarlane who saved him after being shot. Bonnie overall is one of the few decent people we meet probably in the entire story now that I think about it. However, I don't think she holds a ton of relevance when it comes to the themes and story of John Marston and the game overall. She's more the tutorial character. I do think she gives us a peek into what John is as a person though, and what he thinks when it comes to his redemption. In Women and Cattle, we get our first real look into John Marston himself. And John up to this point had been playing his cards close to his chest, not trying to speak up much about his previous life. However, out of respect to Bonnie, he finally tells us who he is. He's an outlaw, a man who killed, robbed, and ransomed with a gang. He's here to try to claim the men he once rode with. Bill Williamson is one of them. John also has your pretty typical tragic backstory of his father and mother dying when he was young. Being an orphan, he was taken in by Dutch, who taught him how to read and see what is good in the world. However, that last quote, knowing who Dutch was, makes me wonder what it means. A theme in Red Dead is trying to justify all the bad we've done, whether it be giving the natives God, even though we took all their land and killed their people, or through John saying he robbed from the rich and gave to the poor, like a Robin Hood story. But does it justify breaking into banks and killing innocent people, or killing anyone you just didn't like? Something John says rings very loud when we hear it.
Even in this new country, memories don't really fade. People don't forget. Nothing gets forgiven.
John is on a path to redemption, a path of leaving his old life behind and living a new one with his family. But does he truly believe this will happen? Can our worst sins be absolved? And can we find forgiveness in a world that seems to remember everything? This is what the character of John Marston tries to answer. Anyway, after that boo-hoo cry about my life story, we get some real shit like ranching cows. The best missions that absolutely never get annoying or old or make me want to just slam my head against the wall. I love them so much. When doing the Bonnie missions, we also have the Marshall Lee missions at the same time. Lee is an interesting case of satire. He isn't as obvious as, say, Seth or Wes Dickens, which I enjoy. However, he still has his own quirks. Lee is the case of a marshal who's failing his job. In our first interaction with him, he says he can't hunt the likes of Bill Williamson because it's his job to keep his town in order. Yet not a minute later, we learn the massive amount of problems it has. The railway is corrupt, there are gangs killing people for sport, and others just threatening to shoot up the town. We can understand why he can't go after Bill, as John asks, but he seems to be failing at enforcing the law in general. A common saying we hear as we get deeper into Lee's missions, and nothing happens to drive the plot forward, is one of libertarianism and anti-government. When riding with Lee to deal with outlaw gangs, he constantly says all they bring is taxes and trouble, which is ironic knowing the very state New Austin is in. The gangs are on a rampage, people are being murdered constantly, and Lee thinks the violent murderers wouldn't have acted up if the government never arrived. And if it wasn't for Marston, who was sent by the government, who's to say Lee and his two hillbilly deputies would have been able to deal with these notorious outlaw gangs? Ironically though, Lee is a firm supporter of civilization right after saying the government brings nothing but trouble. We hear him say civilization and laws need to be enforced with a strong hand, whacking anyone who doesn't abide by the rules. Overall, Lee is another example of the contradictions we find on the western frontier. After at least nearly 3 hours of doing a lot of missions, we meet some new people in our wacky emporium of strange characters. The first of these is Nigel West Dickens, a slimy snake oil salesman who cons people into buying his tonics. However, even though this is the slow burn part of the game, I do think one of the best missions comes from him, when you do some acting and fun games to sell his tonics to just about everyone. He represents the fun stereotype of the crooked businessman who does nothing but lie. He agrees to help John, but not till after at least 4 to 5 missions of horse racing. I don't know, I lost count after the 3rd one. As John says later in the game,
Because he's a harmless old fraud, the kind of man that built this country.
which just about sums up his entire character. From Nigel West Dickens, we meet people like Seth, who's said to be at a church due to how pious he is at digging up bodies, and Irish, a drunken immigrant who about 90% of the time feeds John with so much bullshit, it's actually outstanding. Seth and Irish themselves don't really have much character, but I think more to say about the people who lived in the Wild West. Crazy treasure hunters who are willing to dig up dead bodies in order to make a quick buck, and drunken immigrants who are disregarded by the rest of civilization. A big contrast to the virtuous American civilization in Western films. Seth and Irish's missions are definitely the roughest. The new Austin chapter is a very slow burn. The central plot of John needing to capture Bill is only touched on very lightly when we have a shootout with him. And this is about half of the game. You know, if I loved ranching so much, I would just go outside and ride a horse.
Fuck you.
But nah, in this game, you will need to ranch cows multiple times to really get that cowboy feel. But eventually, after multiple hours of gameplay where we help our wacky characters, we get to the end of it, and we have an assault on Fort Mercer. The assault on Fort Mercer shows the brutality that technology brings to the West, as we sneak into the fort and start blasting with a machine gun, killing who knows how many people in the process. Our wacky characters help us out, and the fort is cleared. However, Bill is nowhere to be found, and it is said he has fled to Mexico, making our main hero need to venture further south than he was originally hoping. Mexico is where we finally get into the great meat that is Red Dead Redemption. It only took about half of the game, who would have known? Anyway, riding into Mexico with Far Away playing in the background is one of the greatest gaming experiences you can have. I mean, it's not really amazingly subtle what's being said here, in John going further south and further away from the people he loves. And the first couple missions we do here are a basic introduction to the Mexican plot. One from the perspective of the governments through De Santa, and the other through the Mexican rebels through Linde and Ricketts. Mexico, you see, is in a great struggle for revolution from the tyrannical dictator Ignacio Sanchez, who has sent troops up under Colonel Agustin Allende to suppress peasant uprisings which are being led by the charismatic Abraham Reyes. Linde and Ricketts overall is similar to Bonnie, one of the better people you meet in the game, who acts kinda like a guide to this new land. He's a small mentor to John, and someone John really opens up to. Landon is another example of the dying West, a once great outlaw who's now a relic. In his words,
"Look at me now, sitting around here like some low-rent would-be messiah."
the way John has lived is on his way out, and Landon Ricketts in exile is proof of this. We help Ricketts help the revolutionaries, and this is where we first meet Luisa, a 19-year-old revolutionary teacher, who I wanted to introduce now, but I'll get into her real story in a second. When we meet with De Santa and soon Allende, we see just how awful they are. They regularly rape women, kill people for the sport of it, and burn down entire villages to send a message. Women and children aren't safe from this brutal war. It's interesting John is more than fine to go along with it, as long as they help him. He plays both sides to try to figure out where Bill and Javier are. The struggle and blight of the Mexican peasants don't really mean anything to him overall. I do think it says a lot he's willing to do anything it takes, even working with the worst people to get his former friends. Both Mexican peasants and Mexican soldiers are murdered in cold blood to find these two outlaws. This is where I want to talk about Luisa. I think she and Abraham Reyes are what really make Mexico fun and engaging the playthrough overall. Like Steph and Irish, they are satire, but with actual character to make them absorbing. Luisa is a definition of an idealist revolutionary, one who really thinks through Reyes, real change will come. When she talks of him, we get images of a great revolutionary who cares not about class or status, but wants to make Mexico a better place. Luisa sees him with rose-tinted glasses to hope for any change at all will come to her devastated homeland. We learn from her the government has Reyes captured and ready to kill, but because of Luisa and John, he's saved. And we meet Abraham Reyes for the first time. Abraham Reyes is a satirical character done right, and overall is probably the best character we find in Mexico. Even though Luisa claimed Reyes was an amazing man who cared about the people of Mexico, we soon learn he is no different compared to Allende and Sanchez. He is an upper-class Mexican who is an arrogant womanizer, not to the point of Allende, but still not much better. When we get him back to Luisa, he sings a song about her, calling her the wrong name, which at this point is just comical about how much he really cares. After saving Reyes, John goes again to help out the government, who first sent him on a suicide mission, then try to kill him outright after helping the Reyes revolutionaries. However, due to an intervention of Reyes himself, John is saved.
They will kill you if you don't get your ropes off.
And we can work firmly with the rebels when it comes to Mexico. In multiple missions leading up to the assault on Allende, we see more of Reyes, and how the lines that divide the revolutionary from the government aren't far. Reyes talks about wanting to break the propaganda of the Mexican government, but he does this by using his own propaganda, like when he tells John how everyone is telling him he broke out of captivity alone. He gives speeches that basically have no meaning, but always ends with shouts and applause. He has no plan on how to make Mexico recover. He says the peasants are poorer than ever before, but how does he plan to make that better? He gripes about American racism when it comes to Mexicans, however, when it comes to Chinese,
I hear you ain't exactly made them very welcome.
That is different. They are an inferior race.
when it comes down to it, Reyes is nothing more than a privileged Mexican nobleman who is using the blight of the peasants to his own advantage to gain power and wealth. But credit where credit is due, Reyes does find us Javier and Bill, who are under the protection of Allende the entire time. So it seems John was played like a fool for all his government work, just this time it was with the Mexicans instead of Americans. I do find it really funny the main plot is centered around capturing Bill and Javier when they have a combined screen time of like maybe 20 minutes in total, which for a 20-hour game might as well make them secondary characters. This is another place where I think the story could have done better if we got some more time with them. to develop their characters and learn who they are. All we get is some talk from John about how they all have gone crazy, but we never get to see it like I wish we could. After giving Javier up to the government, we gotta finish off Bill, then head up to Blackwater and finish up our job, taking down the old gang. In the final Mexican mission, we do our final assault on the Mexican government. Reyes, due to his carelessness, again, is captured by the army, being beaten. Marston walks in on the situation, telling everyone to put their guns down, and this is where we see one of our first tragedies of Red Dead Redemption, where Luisa runs to help her idealized version of a man, being shot and killed instantly, unceremoniously. However, this gives John enough time to save Reyes and do our final assault, killing nearly an entire army of men who were most likely drafted to fight for a tyrannical government. In a chase down, after hours in this sometimes godforsaken game, we catch Bill Williamson and put a bullet right in his skull, while Reyes kills Allende. Reyes tells John his people are free due to him, where to which John responds, it was due to people who laid down their lives, like Luisa. Reyes agrees, but can't even remember who she was, but declares a day for her named Laura's Day. Our last conversation with Reyes is Marston telling him to remember why he wanted power. Then he rides off, heading to catch Dutch van der Linde. The Mexico story is an extremely sad one where hundreds die for no change at all. Later in the game, we can find a newspaper saying Reyes is the new president, become dictator. He has ordered a mass execution of protesters, delayed democratic elections, and has denied any of his citizens are starving due to proof otherwise. Similar to how the former dictator said how the peasants are better off than ever before, Reyes says the same thing, telling the world Mexico is entering a new golden age, citing his new presidential palace as fact everyone is united. Red Dead has a cynical take on revolution, one where the good idealist, the one who wants the most amount of change and is willing to put their life down for it, is shot without any notice and forgotten by the people who do take power. The ones who rode the waves of change for selfishness and power are the ones who survive and tear down anything the revolution hoped to achieve. The Luises of the world are forgotten, and the Reyeses will come and go, the cycle repeating till the end of time. Knowing real Mexican history, we know it won't get much better after 1914 when Reyes is president. Finally, after hours of ranching, horse racing, shooting, and revolution having, we get to the absolute golden stake of the game, the hunt for Dutch van der Linde. This, without a doubt, is my favorite part of the game, mostly because it's straight to the point and has actual meaning to it. First, we walk into, wait, goddammit, we gotta play poker for a bit first because this dumbass needs to be here at a certain time mechanic. After playing poker until the sun came up and losing a total of $100, we finally get to meet Edgar Ross and Archer, the two government agents who have been observing your mission in progress. We'll get more into detail about them later, but after a mission of shooting people, as per usual, and saving our native informative, we meet the CEO of cocaine himself, Dr. McDougal, an anthropologist who was kicked out of Yale due to his degeneracy, and boy oh boy, he sure does fit that bill. McDougal is the old 19th to 20th century eugenics professor fit into a person. Crackpot ideas are promoted by the highest of the academic world, trying to prove the difference between the white man and the natives of America, and why such is such. Irony lies in the first McDougal mission, where the first thing he tells us is his previous entire book was proved wrong by one discovery. A real question to ask is, does McDougal really believe there's a difference between the white Anglo-Saxon and the American Indian, or does he just want to put his preconceived notions onto a race that's been constantly at battle with the Americans? It's a lot easier to justify relocation if you can prove the other people were a subspecies the entire time. Here, we also meet Nastas, a re-educated native who breaks all of McDougal's rules when it comes to natives, aka he's smart. Nastas proves much more of an ally than McDougal, actually being, helpful. Overall, I much enjoy the portrayals of these old ideals as being nothing more than words from a crazy cocaine addict, much how they are in real life. After we go on a fun snowy adventure in the mountains, we meet our man of the hour, and probably overall my favorite part of Red Dead Redemption, Dutch van der Linde. Dutch has maybe 10 minutes of screen time. This act about him is really short, yet overall I find the most captivating and interesting character there is. The first time we really get to talk to him is a holdup in the Blackwater Bank, where he has a gun to an innocent woman's head. Dutch is a silver-tongued bastard, the type who you would give money to even though he owed you $20. However, it is interesting to note that John throughout the game has saved people in the exact same situation, yet here he holds. An innocent woman died because that love of Dutch never left John. The next two missions revolve around McDougal. First, we go up to tall trees to meet with some natives and try to talk peace. However, peace talks at this point are doomed to fail. Nastas is shot in the head by his own people, and we're forced to kill our way out. I actually had to pause when Nastas died because I was shocked and sad. Following this, we see our good pal Dutch again, who wants to have a friendly chat about the subject of anthropology and eugenics with McDougal. This talk may involve a bullet to the head, so Marston does his best to avoid it. There is some conversation in this mission between McDougal and Marston that I think is really important, but I want to come back to it later, so make a small mental note of it. Next is our last mission in this act, and overall, I believe this is Red Dead at its absolute best and most profound. The great argument between civilization and a free world. We meet with Ross, who overall is a bona fide douchebag, and he admits it himself. He tells us the government is the bad guy. They enforce the rules, and they tell us what we can and can't do. Are the rules perfect? No, they aren't. There are contradictions, and there are things that aren't fair, and the government is perfectly aware of this. However, what is the alternative? As Ross puts it,
The
I'll tell you what the alternative is. It's not complicated. It's about one man and his gun versus another man.
Civilization gives us the ability to have our debate about which flower is better, in Ross's words. We can argue and bicker, however, we know when to draw the line. In a world with no civilization, how long before one man pulls his gun or raises his fist? As Ross says,
Sure. Civilization may be dull, but the alternative, Mr. Marston, is hell.
Following this, we get into an armored car. Finally, the Industrial Revolution has allowed for mass killing to be mobile and easy to use. This is an important little detail, and I'll get into it a bit more going down the line. But we finally begin our last assault on Dutch's gang and his native following. The army is sent in with our new technology, and we gun down anyone in our path. After breaching through the fort and going forward and chasing Dutch, we meet our other half of the debate of a free world. John in Mexico always talked about the gang believing they could fight for change, fight for something better. Here, we finally see the end of that thought.
We can't always fight nature, John. We can't fight change. Can't fight gravity. We can't fight nothing. My whole life, all I ever did was fight.
Dutch accepts he can't fight the nature of change. He can't stop the Wild West from ending. That is how the world is going. And the life of a free outlaw fighting against an expanding government is a fruitless one. That, if you played Red Dead 2, you know leads to deaths on an unimaginable level. Just like gravity is set in stone, so is change. Change will always march on. Change will sweep the masses, which will make it the new norm. We can't fight things such as change.
But I can't give up, neither. I can't fight my own nature. That's a paradox, John. You see.
However, we also can't fight our own nature, who we are as a person, our beliefs, our core values. If they are set in stone just as much as gravity is, we can't fight them either. Who you are as a person will always win out in everything we do. You can't hide who you are forever. It'll eventually show. This is the paradox of Dutch Vanderlyn, a man who fights like hell for what he believes in. But what he believes in is an echo of the past. The Wild West is gone. The age of outlaws and gunslingers is out of the picture. Dutch argues for a free life, of not needing to justify anything. Doing what you want when you want to do it. No need to placate anyone. No need to kiss the right boots. A free man's world. A world where a man has a right to shoot someone if he disagrees about a flower. This is not an ideal many want. Civilization will always prevail over anarchy. The government, with their machine gun cars and new technology and weaponry, will need to justify why they spend millions of dollars on it. And as Dutch says,
When I'm gone, they'll just find another monster. They have to. Because they have to justify their wages.
that monster could be another outlaw, another threat to civilization, a country that is a threat. And considering what we saw in World War I, II, and the Cold War, see that far off? It never ends, and it never will end. Civilization will always justify itself. That is a flaw that will forever plague it. In a free world, nothing ever needs to be justified.
Time has passed. Yeah.
As the time of the outlaw and gunslinger has passed, so has Dutch's and John's time. Instead of being taken in to be hung or shot by anyone, Dutch decides to take his own life, free of needing to answer to anyone. And so, he falls off the mountain.
And now I know the only compass that I need.
Finally, after paying his dues, John can return home to his family. I don't think John really believes he earned his redemption through all his deeds though. All he did was exactly what he did before, killing people. Except this time, it was for the government, instead for a gang. So therefore, everything's okay. Here, I believe he does the best to atone for his past. He tries to be a better father to Jack, and he does his best to be a good husband to Abigail. He says how important it is he gave a good life to Jack, and wants to let him do what he wants to do, something John didn't have as a kid. Talking to Abigail, saying they need to change for Jack's sake, if no other reason. However, no matter how hard you try, you can never change the past. It'll always haunt you. Abigail and John might have a good relationship, but what Jack has been through his entire life will never go away. John just can't change now and expect Jack to be happy. Jack is in constant fear John will leave again, and that he will abandon him. But John really does try to be a good father to his son. I believe the last talk they have shows this. John really does want to live this life, making the farm the most profitable in the county. Their last talk is about the machine that can make men fly. Just as Dutch said, they found their other monster. The army storms John's house on a mission to take out the last of the Vanderlyn gang. First, his uncle, dying to protect the Marston family. As things get worse, John and his family enter the barn. John gives him a horse and sends him off, knowing the army is only here for him. After taking one peek outside the barn doors, John steps out to meet his fate. As John falls to the ground, Ross lights a cigar. Civilization just had another victory. John did earn his redemption, but not through killing. His last act towards his family showed he was a loving man, but to the rest of the world, John was still nothing but an outlaw. What Dutch said ringed here: you can't fight your own nature. John was never a rancher. He was an outlaw by heart, and he was always an outlaw. If his farm did fail, how long would it be before he went to extreme measures to ensure his family survived? The bigger question to ask is, did the government and Ross really care at all? Or is John just another monster to justify their wages? A question I asked earlier in this video was whether our worst sins could be absolved, and whether we can find forgiveness in a world that seems to remember everything. Rockstar's answer seems bleak, that no matter how hard you try, you cannot run from the past, which is true. However, even though the past cannot be run from, who you are now is not determined by the past. John may have been seen as an outlaw, but we know all he ever wanted what was best for his family, what was best for Jack, and by protecting them, he earned his redemption.
Oh, bury me not on the lone prairie, where the coyotes wail and the wind blows free.
John Marston died in 1911, soon to be followed by his wife Abigail in 1914, leaving just about no one but Jack as one of the final members of the Vanderlyn gang. Just as the government could never forget anything John did, Jack could never forget anything the government did. So he goes off to track an old Edgar Ross, a man retired from the government, but the man who killed John Marston. Jack finds Ross on the banks of a river, and it isn't long before things go sour. Jack draws his revolver and shoots Ross. Overall, this is probably the biggest tragedy of all of Red Dead Redemption. The one thing John never wanted, the one thing he tried to keep his son from becoming, is what he becomes. Jack is now an outlaw that will now need to worry about ending up like John. Red Dead Redemption shows us the cycle of vengeance and murder. Just as John died for nothing, so did Ross. What did killing him achieve? It won't bring John back. It won't make Jack happier or make his life better. If anything, it will lead to a full-blown police hunt due to a former federal officer being murdered. Jack follows the footsteps of John, something he never would have wanted. The last shot of Red Dead Redemption is Jack looking at his revolver, taking it in. He is now an outlaw, and he will face the consequences. And as he walks away, Red Dead Redemption cracks on the screen. Remember a few minutes back when we were in Act 3 and I was telling you to remember an important scene with MacDougal? Well, here it is. In getting MacDougal away from the Wild West, he says,
Dreamt of documenting the last days of the Old West, the romance, the honor, the nobility. But it turns out it's just people killing each other.
Overall, I believe this is what Rockstar really wanted to tell us when it comes to the Wild West and how much it is romanticized in modern culture. I said as a joke at the start of this video that cowboys are the knights of American culture, and that is remarkably true. Just as knights are Europe's grand men who had chivalry and fought for justice, cowboys are the ones who tamed the Wild West. They fought against all the evils in the world to ensure the West would be a good place to live. The Wild West was full of nothing but glory and honor, but Red Dead Redemption shows us otherwise. Did anything Jack, John, Bill, Dutch, Ross, or Reyes do have any glory in it? Nothing in this game is filled with glory and honor. All it is shooting and killing people. The way they made it look honorable was by justifying ways to describe people as lesser, to make it seem right. Who knows how many people died for no reason in order to civilize the West? Untold hundreds of thousands. What's sadder to think of is who exactly will be remembered. The passionate Luisa will be forgotten, and her ideals for a free Mexico died with her. But the tyranny of Reyes will live in the history books forever for what his revolution achieved. John will never be remembered as the family man he is, but instead a notorious criminal. And men like Ross will be remembered as the people who civilized the West. Overall, Red Dead Redemption isn't a masterpiece. It sure has its problems, but it is a really amazing game that I recommend playing. While it does suffer from Rockstar satire in the start, it is better the more you play through it, and the themes of this game are really unforgettable. Have a good one. I hope you enjoyed this video.
One is starving for action. In Uganda, our commando scientists are fighting to see how much action can fit on a Blu-ray. Yeah, we can add one more action scene. No, we can't. No, we can't do it. No, the action we have is too much. Man, the Blu-ray cannot manage that action. We should put it more Kung Fu. We can do it. We did it. Yeah. Uganda's first Blu-ray.
My grandfather said this mummy is worth millions.